This is the story of Blake Turner and his wife Iris Turner. They had been married for 6 years when Blake first began to mistake Iris's stillness for emptiness. She was a woman who listened more than she spoke, who observed more than she performed, and Blake, raised in a household where volume meant importance, had gradually come to interpret her quietness as a kind of absence. The emotional core of their marriage had always been asymmetrical. Blake brought energy, opinion, and presence. Iris brought steadiness, precision, and patience. What Blake never understood was that patience, in certain people, is not passivity, it is preparation. This is the story of a man who confused silence with surrender, and a woman who used that confusion to document everything. The house on Mercer Lane had a certain kind of order to it that visitors often admired. Clean lines, warm lighting, bookshelves arranged by color on one side and subject on the other, Iris's side and Blake's side respectively, though nobody who visited ever asked whose was whose. They assumed the aesthetic belonged to both of them equally. That was the first of many assumptions that lived comfortably in their home. Blake came home on a Tuesday in early October to find dinner already made, and Iris sitting at the kitchen table with her laptop open, reading something he couldn't see from the doorway. She looked up when she heard him, offered a small smile, and closed the screen without rushing. "Traffic?" she asked. "Not bad," he said, setting his keys on the hook by the door. His hook. She used the drawer. "Something smells good. Roasted chicken, the lemon one." It was his favorite, and she knew it, and neither of them said anything more about it. That was the texture of their evening's small courtesies that had once been expressions of love and had since become something more habitual, more like good manners between people who respected each other but had stopped wondering about each other. Blake worked in commercial real estate, managing acquisitions for a mid-sized firm that had grown considerably in the past 3 years. He was good at his job in the way that certain men are good at things that reward confidence and momentum. He talked well. He read rooms. He had the kind of handshake that people remembered. At work, he was described as driven. At home, he was mostly tired, but he didn't think of it that way. He thought of himself as present, which was not quite the same thing. Iris consulted for nonprofit organizations on governance and compliance matters. Her work was meticulous and largely invisible to the people around her. She spent her days reading contracts, identifying risk, and writing reports that were dense with careful language. Blake knew this about her in the way a person knows something they have never been particularly curious about accurately but shallowly. Their friend Marcus had joined them for dinner that Friday. He was Blake's friend first, though over time he had developed an independent respect for Iris that he expressed mostly through the quality of his attention when she spoke. Blake noticed this sometimes, but categorized it as Marcus being polite. "You've been traveling a lot," Marcus said to Blake, refilling his own glass. "Charlotte, then Denver, then back to Charlotte again." Blake shrugged. "It's the Hargrove deal. We're close." "How close?" "Close enough that I'm going back Monday." Iris set her fork down quietly, not loudly enough to signal anything, and picked up her water glass instead. Marcus glanced at her. Blake was looking at his phone, angling it slightly so the screen wasn't visible. "Iris," Marcus said, "you were saying last time that you were working on something for a foundation in Connecticut?" She nodded. "Governance restructuring. They'd had some complications in how their board relationships are documented." She paused. "Or not documented, I suppose, is more accurate. That's a delicate thing to untangle." "It is," she said, "but it's useful work. When the documentation is done properly, everyone is protected. When it isn't," she stopped. She seemed to consider the rest of the sentence and then, quietly, set it aside. "It creates problems nobody anticipated." Blake looked up from his phone briefly. "She's good at that stuff," he said in the way someone might compliment a neighbor's garden warmly, vaguely, without stopping to actually look at it. After Marcus left and the dishes were cleared, Iris stood at the sink with the water running, her back to Blake as he moved through the kitchen. He paused behind her for a moment, just a moment, his hand lifting slightly as though he meant to touch her shoulder. Then his phone buzzed. He answered it and walked out of the room. Iris turned off the tap. She stood there in the quiet kitchen for a long time, her hands dry, her expression not hurt exactly, but something more interior than that. A kind of noting, as though she were filing something away in a place she had been maintaining for much longer than anyone knew. November arrived with a kind of gray that settled into a city's bones and stayed. Blake was in Charlotte for most of it, or Denver, or somewhere with a conference room and a catered lunch and a deal that was always almost done. He called when he remembered to, which was often enough that it didn't seem like neglect, but not often enough that it felt like reaching. Iris answered when he called. She asked questions that were attentive and brief. She did not fill silences with complaint or longing. She reported on the house, on small neighborhood events, on a book she was reading. Blake told her about the deal, about a dinner that had run too long, about a junior associate who was starting to frustrate him. She listened. He felt, vaguely, that she was a good wife. What he did not know, what he had stopped trying to know, was what moved underneath her listening. He had decided at some point in their fourth or fifth year that Iris was not a deeply interior person. She was steady, which he valued. She was competent, which he respected. But passionate, searching, conflicted, these were words he associated with people who made their inner lives more visible. Iris did not make her inner life visible, and so Blake had concluded, in the way that people conclude things when they are not paying real attention, that she did not have much of one. This was the fundamental error of his marriage. Iris sat in her home office on a Wednesday evening in late November, with 3 files open on her laptop and a yellow legal pad at her elbow. She had a habit of handwriting key observations before she typed them. Something about the physical act of writing helped her think. The legal pad was nearly full. She looked at it for a moment, then turned back to the screen. She was reviewing a set of documents that she had begun compiling 8 months ago. They were organized with the same methodical care she brought to her client work: chronological, cross-referenced, annotated with dates, times, and in several cases, corroborating emails she had received or overheard discussed. She was not emotional about this work. That was the part that might have surprised people, that she felt, in the doing of it, something close to calm. She had not started it in anger. She had started it in clarity. It had been a Tuesday in March when she had seen, not snooped, but simply seen, an email on Blake's open laptop while she was setting a coffee cup beside it. The email itself had been almost nothing, a few lines, a name she didn't recognize, a tone that was lighter than the way Blake wrote to colleagues. She had not said anything. She had stood there for a moment, and something had moved through her that was not quite grief, and not quite decision, but something between the two, a kind of quiet inventory, in which she assessed what she knew and what she suspected, and what, if she was honest, she had been not quite knowing for a long time. She had closed the laptop screen gently, and she had gone to her office, and she had opened a new folder on her desktop. She had titled it simply, Documentation. The phone rang. Blake. "Hey," she said, answering. "Hey. Long day. You okay?" "Fine. Good, actually." She moved the legal pad aside. "How's the Hargrove thing? We signed today." "Blake, that's really good. Congratulations." She could hear the particular quality of his pleasure on the other end, full, uncomplicated. She recognized it as something she had once participated in and now witnessed from a slight remove, the way you might watch a film you have already seen. "We're going out to celebrate," he said. "The team." "Of course." She paused. "I'm glad it came together." There was a brief silence, comfortable on his end, less so on hers. "You're quiet," he said. "I was thinking," she said. And then she said, which was true, "You know, sometimes I wonder if anyone is really paying attention." Blake made a sound of mild agreement. "Like, to any of it," she continued. Her voice had gone a fraction softer, a fraction more unguarded than she usually allowed. She looked at her screen, then very briefly at the space beyond it. Not at Blake, not at anything in the room, at some middle distance that felt, in that moment, like an audience she had almost forgotten was there. Maybe, I don't know, maybe someone's listening. Maybe like share this or tell someone. I don't know. I don't know why I said that. There was a pause. What? Blake said. She shook her head, though he couldn't see it. Nothing. Long week, go celebrate. You earned it. After she hung up, she sat very still for a moment. Then she returned to the legal pad and wrote one more line at the bottom of the page, underlined it, and closed the cover. The Calloway family arrived on a Saturday in January. Blake had been told they were coming. Iris had mentioned it 2 weeks before, and again the week prior, in that even-toned way she had of conveying information without making it feel urgent. Her mother, Patricia, her older brother, Elliot, and a man named David Rourke, whom Iris described as a family friend, and whom Blake did not think much about until the moment David set a leather portfolio case on the dining room table and sat down across from him. They were impeccably mannered. Patricia Calloway had the bearing of a woman who had spent decades in rooms where things were decided, and she conveyed this, not through arrogance, but through economy. She said exactly what she meant, no more. Elliot was warm in a careful way, the kind of warm that makes you want to earn it. David Rourke said almost nothing for the first 20 minutes. He poured his own water, crossed his ankle over his knee, and observed. Blake had expected family dinner. He had prepared, vaguely, to be charming. Instead, David opened the portfolio. We want to be straightforward, Patricia said, because I think Iris has always deserved that. Blake looked at Iris. She was seated beside her mother, her hands folded on the table, her expression entirely composed. She had the look of someone who had rehearsed not having a look. The documents were impeccable. David War, it turned out, was not a family friend in any casual sense. He was an attorney, the kind whose practice was built on a particular intersection of family and corporate law, and the documents he had assembled, with Iris's records and her own compiled file, told a story that Blake had believed no one was watching closely enough to tell. There were 2 NDAs Blake had signed as part of business arrangements, both of which included personal conduct clauses. Standard language he had assumed at the time, the sort of paragraph that lives in the middle of a contract and gets read quickly and signed without unease, because who expects it to matter? Iris had read them. There was a financial account Blake had opened 18 months ago that, in its structure, constituted a marital asset under their agreement, an agreement Iris had drafted the addendum to. Because Iris drafted addendums for a living, he had not remembered that she had drafted it. There was a pattern of communication, documented and dated, that suggested emotional misconduct under the terms of their marriage agreement, a document Iris's firm had actually helped formalize 6 years ago, at Blake's request, because he had liked the idea of it at the time. Blake had liked a lot of ideas at the time. He sat very still while David explained it. He was the kind of man who went still when he was processing something large, not defensive, not explosive, but temporarily vacated, as though his personality needed a moment to catch up to reality. No one is threatening you, Elliot said quietly when David had finished. That's important for you to understand. We're presenting, Iris said. Her voice was measured, the way that I was asked to present things in every professional context I've ever been in. Because that's how you protect everyone. You've been? Blake stopped. He looked at the documents, then at her. For how long? 8 months, she said, give or take. You were documenting me. She didn't flinch, but she softened, slightly, and this was somehow worse. I was protecting myself, Blake, the way I should have been doing for longer than I was. He wanted to feel indignant, and he could feel the shape of that emotion available to him, the familiar framework of being misunderstood, of being reduced to something unfair. But the documents were real. The signatures were his, the dates were accurate. He knew with the particular clarity of a man who has spent his career reading rooms that there was nothing in the portfolio that could be successfully argued. What do you want? He asked. Patricia looked at Iris. Iris looked at Blake. A mediated separation, Iris said. Documented. Civil. And I wanted acknowledged just between us. No public performance that you knew. That at some level you knew. The room was quiet. Blake thought about the hand he had almost placed on her shoulder in October. He thought about the phone he had picked up instead. I convinced myself I didn't, he said finally. Iris nodded. It was the closest thing to forgiveness in the room, and it was not quite forgiveness. Spring came without announcement, the way it does in cities one morning. The trees simply had color again, and nobody could say exactly when it started. Blake had moved into a furnished apartment in March, a temporary arrangement that had quietly become permanent by April. It had everything a person needed, and none of the things that made a place feel inhabited. He bought a coffee maker. He hung one print on the wall. He ordered groceries through an app and ate most of his meals at his desk or at the bar 2 blocks away, where he'd become a familiar enough presence that the bartender knew his drink. He told the story to Marcus and to 2 or 3 others who asked, in a version that was mostly true. He said the marriage had run its course. He said they had grown in different directions. He said Iris was fine, that they were handling it like adults. All of this was accurate enough that he could say it without the specific guilt of lying. What he did not say, what he had not yet fully formed into language, was the part that came to him at odd moments, in the elevator at work, or in the silence before he fell asleep, that he had never actually looked at her. He had looked toward her, which was different. He had appreciated her presence the way you appreciate good weather gratefully, passively, without wondering what it took to make it. Marcus came by the apartment on a Thursday in May. He brought beer and did not make it feel like a welfare check, which Blake appreciated. "How's work?" Marcus asked. Hargrove closed. "We're on to the next one." "And otherwise?" Blake shrugged. I'm fine. I'm fine." Marcus turned his beer bottle in his hands. "You know, I always thought you underestimated her." "I know," Blake said. This surprised Marcus. He could tell. "I knew it at some level. I just didn't." He stopped. "I thought quiet meant simple. That was my mistake." "She's doing well," Marcus said carefully. "I ran into her at the farmer's market." "I know, she told me." He paused. "We text sometimes, logistics mostly, but sometimes other things." This was the part Blake had not anticipated, that the dissolution of his marriage had not dissolved Iris. She had continued to exist, fully, with the same exactness she'd always had, and he found himself, in unguarded moments, thinking about her in a way he had not thought about her when they were together. Not with romance exactly, but with something adjacent to regret that had not yet found its proper name. He had begun, in a small way, to read the kinds of books she had always read. He wasn't sure why. He told himself it was coincidence. They had been on his list, but his list, if he was honest, had been her list, transferred over years by proximity and mild interest, and the eventual absorption that happens between people who share shelves. He was not, he thought, a bad man. He had not intended harm, but he had been comfortable in a way that required another person's discomfort to sustain, and he had not asked enough questions to know it. That was the thing he kept returning to, in the elevator, in the bar, in the particular silence of an apartment that had no second coffee cup, the questions he had not asked. They met in September at a coffee shop that was neither near his apartment nor near the house, a middle place, chosen by some unspoken agreement to be neutral. Iris was there before him. She had a cup already and a small notebook open on the table, which she closed when she saw him come in. Blake ordered at the counter and sat across from her. She looked well. She looked, if anything, lighter than she had in the last 2 years of their marriage, which was not a comfortable observation. "Thanks for meeting me," he said. "Of course." The paperwork was functionally complete. This was a practical meeting, ostensibly, to review a final document that needed both their signatures. But both of them had arrived knowing it would be more than that, in the way that last things tend to be more than their stated purpose. He signed where he needed to sign. She countersigned. They slid the folder to one side and sat with their coffee cups and the quiet that had always been theirs, though it felt different now, less like a shared room and more like a space that remembered what it used to hold. "Are you happy?" he asked. She considered it honestly. "I'm clearer. I think clarity is what I needed more than happiness." He nodded. He understood this in a way he wouldn't have a year ago. "I wasn't fair to you," he said, "and I don't mean the legal things. I mean how I saw you." He wrapped both hands around his cup. I decided you were a certain kind of person without ever really finding out. Iris looked at him. Her expression was not cold, and it was not warm in the way it had once been. It was something more considered than either. I think, she said slowly, that you saw what you needed to see, and I let you because I thought. She paused. I thought my patience would teach you to look more carefully. But patience isn't a lesson, Blake. It's just a quality. It doesn't transform the person watching it. He sat with that for a moment. What did you feel, he asked, when you were compiling those documents? She thought about it. Steady, she said, which was sad, I think, because I had expected to feel sad. But mostly I felt steady, like I was finally doing something that matched the situation. And now? She looked out the window. The city moved past it, indifferent and continuous, and she watched it for a moment before answering. Tired, she said, relieved. Both things can be true. She turned back to him. I don't regret the years, Blake. I want you to know that. I think they were real. I think we both meant it in the beginning. He thought about the dinner she had made, roasted chicken, lemon, his favorite. He thought about her hands drying by the sink. He thought about the hand he had almost placed on her shoulder. I think I knew, he said, that I was losing something. I just thought I'd have more time to. He didn't finish it. She didn't finish it for him. That was the last courteous thing she gave him, the space to leave a sentence incomplete without filling in what he couldn't quite say. They finished their coffee. They gathered their respective things with the practiced efficiency of two people who had coordinated shared spaces and then learned to separate them. At the door, she paused. Take care of yourself, she said. Not take care, not goodbye. The full phrase, with the weight of its specificity, as though she had thought about it. You too, he said. She walked out into the September afternoon, and he stood in the doorway a moment longer than he needed to, watching the space where she had been. Not hoping she would turn back, not even wanting her to exactly, just noting it. The way she had always noted things. He walked back inside to leave a tip, and on his way out he held the door for someone coming in, and the city absorbed him, and that was all. He thought about her patience later that evening in the apartment with one print on the wall. How long she had maintained it, how precisely she had used it. He had thought it was the absence of something fire, demand, need. It had never been an absence. It had always been a form of attention he had never learned to recognize, directed at everything, including him, especially him, with the quiet and devastating thoroughness of someone who understood that what is not spoken is often what matters most. He had lived beside that kind of attention for 6 years. He had called it quiet. Some things are not said because they don't need to be. Some things are not said because the person who might say them has already decided that actions will speak instead, in files, in folders, in the careful architecture of documented truth. And some silences are not empty, they are simply patient.